Welcome into Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Joel, what is up, Hoopster?
Hey, welcome in, everybody. And of course, if you are listening to us on Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, all of those places where you find podcasts, and of course, you find us as well, and you want the video version, head on over to YouTube, and you will find the video version of us. And everything I just said is in exact reverse if you are on YouTube and want the audio version. And of course, Arky Shea, this is episode number 60. And typically we've named this after players who have worn a certain jersey number. And I'm going to admit I was rather both lazy and pessimistic, and maybe I'll find out I was wrong. I did not even look up anyone wearing the jersey number 60 because we have the opportunity today to name the episode after somebody who I know we haven't named an episode for yet, but it's definitely time. It's deserving. I'll give you one clue in that last week was the Bill Russell episode. Who do you think episode number 60 would be? Because he was the MVP in the year 1960.
Oh, is that supposed to be like common knowledge, like 1960?
Yeah, well, the clue though, Arky Shea, is that last week was Bill Russell, and this week is a player very commonly linked with Bill Russell, almost intertwined, one might say.
Oh, Magic Johnson.
Facetiousness will get you nowhere.
No, who's intertwined?
It is Wilt Chamberlain, the Big Dipper, who was the NBA MVP in 1960. And of course, went up against Bill Russell many times at that center position. And Bill normally got the best of him, but Wilt Chamberlain is all over the NBA record books. And once in a while, did get that championship too.
You know what I can't stand about Wilt Chamberlain? Listen, it's not his fault, okay? Right? This I cannot be mad at him at any point about.
But you just said you can't stand about it. It's a fine line. It's a fine line.
It's a very small part. Very small part. Did you see what Jayson Tatum did when he scored 63 the other night?
I saw that he did score 63. I don't know of any celebratory whatnot.
What did Wilt Chamberlain do when he scored 100?
He held up a small little piece of paper that said 100 on it, did he not? Because no one else was at that game.
Jayson Tatum did 63. And I was like, nope. Can't be a part of this anymore. Don't want to be a part of this.
So you're unhappy that Wilt did it because Jayson Tatum did something hollow and lesser? Like you hold up a sheet of paper if it's got 3 digits on it. That's a rule, right?
Yes, right. But 63 is 2 digits, right? Like It's impressive, but we've seen 63.
Aren't we unhappy about Jayson Tatum then, not Wilt Chamberlain?
Well, listen, I love Jayson Tatum as a player. I don't think Jayson Tatum does that if it never happened before, to be honest with you. So, it's a very specific thing to be mad about. Someone,
dude, if you scored 100 points in a game, be it pickup, much less NBA, you scored 100 points. And hardly anyone was at that game. And the photographer, like the lone photographer who's there, we don't even have video of that game, is like, Wilt, come on. I got to get a picture of you for the paper. This is going to go out. Somebody's got to know about this. And Wilt's like, well, what can I do? Well, here's a piece of paper. Let's draw clearly with a pencil the word 100. I mean, maybe the reporter did it and handed it to him. Would you not hold up the 100 sign and say, future Arkies of the world can suck it? I don't care. I scored 100 points.
He does have that face, so the future Arkies of the world can suck it. He does have that face on him. No, sure. I'm it's a dumb thing to be mad about. But here's the other thing that got me mad. Joel, can you look up in the history books real quick from Basketball Reference, I guess, how
Mhm.
many games did Wilt play for the Celtics?
None for the Celtics.
Why? Why Jayson Tatum in a game in April is doing that when he beat the San Antonio, like was by scoring 63. Like,
well, but here again, it's a gripe with Jayson Tatum. Like,
it's 63.
the logic
Okay, listen.
of looping in Wilt on this almost demands an entire episode. Like,
Joe,
almost 45 minutes just to figure out how you're coming to this conclusion.
Well, now I'm mad at Jason. Like, the first part was Wilt. Now I'm mad at Jason. Like, I get it. Like, if you're going to do like an homage like that, and like Bill Russell did that, right? Like, I understand, like, you're referencing and paying homage to someone who played for that historic franchise.
Right.
But you picked someone who was on a freaking blood rival of theirs, like, for 40 years.
Right.
Right? Like, why would you pay for 63? Like, we've seen 63 before. Like,
we have, and you know, if Kobe wanted to put up, what was it, 81 points? If Kobe wanted to put up 81 on a piece of paper, you're getting warmer. You're certainly getting warmer. Nobody's touching 81. You know, David Robinson back in the day, was it 70, 71 points he scored against the Clippers? Yeah. Like, now granted, when he did that, there's no Kobe game yet. So, and David Robinson is not the kind of guy who would have done anything like that anyway. But I don't think I would have begrudged David Robinson in the late 80s scoring 71. But you're right, like a 60-point game, revel in that. But yeah, it's not on the same level as 81, and certainly not as 100.
I want to look at how many 60-point games we have. Let's see. Holy crap. Okay. We have, Joel, there's a page of at least 40 60-plus point games. Like, it's including guys who have done it. Klay Thompson, James Harden, Kemba Walker, Dame Lillard, Bradley Beal, Jayson Tatum.
Jordan's obviously on that list quite a handful of times.
By the way, those numbers I just mentioned is just 60, right? Like, when we get to 63, which is, I guess, a step above, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Wilt a couple of times, George Gervin, Jordan's on that list of 63. Yeah, it's Carmelo had 62. We forget Carmelo had 62 in a game against the Bobcats. All right, okay, I'm done being mad at that.
Though there's an asterisk if you're playing the Bobcats, that's hardly an NBA game, but no one remembers who Wilt was playing either at the time. So
let's talk about the team that you were defending that just lost by the most points at home in NBA history, huh? The last time we talked, it's like, hey, the Thunder, they're still technically a team, and the Pacers boat raced them by 57 at home.
Well, you know what they did. You know what they did, and of course this reference I stood up for the Thunder the other day because the Celtics had gotten a win, the Celtics had lost to them. And it had been 14 straight losses, whatever it was, for OKC. And I said, they've competed through much of that. They're not as bad as you would think. And then they face Indiana. And OKC is in such tank mode that even their young guys who, if you had any semblance of playing well, other than Darius Bazley, who just came back from injury, like, everyone else is down. They're out. Lou Dort isn't even playing. Pakasevsky is injured and has been injured for a while and isn't back. And now you truly have reached like Sisters of the Poor level in OKC. And Indy gets not only gets Doug McDermott back into the starting lineup, but then Domantas Sabonis comes in and just like triple doubles in the first half, I believe. So
they're so bad on the second games of back-to-backs. I don't know if you get worse than 57 losing to the Suns today, but the Suns could beat them by 57 again.
Yeah.
But can I just real quick, because I don't want to spend this much time talking about the OKC Thunder, because can you imagine coaching a team that scores 95 in modern NBA game and loses by 57? Like, you kind of sort of think
that's what you get. That's what you get paid the money for. Although at that pace, you might not get paid the money for much longer. But
you score almost 100 and you lose by half 100 plus. It's insane.
And I have not gone and watched the tape of said game. Sometimes somebody's just absolutely outclassed, but with that much of outclassing. And here's the other thing. It's not like the Indiana Pacers are an offensive juggernaut team, right? They're an NBA team. They're in the playoff picture, but it's not like you're playing
and it's not even one of these bad offensive teams, but they score a lot of points, like your Timberwolves or the Kings or something. Like, it's not even like one of those.
Yeah, Indiana's like middle of the pack in most areas, and to get beat that bad, it's did everybody give up and wave the white flag, or are you truly trotting out players that are that overmatched? In which case, the ghost of Sam Hinkie is cackling in his grave right now, because that's how you tank, friends.
Well, here's the thing. You got all those draft picks that you can keep using at some point, right? Mm-hmm. So that's they were outscored by 13 in the first, 23 in the second, 20 in the third. And
they gave up 40 plus points in 3 straight quarters. That's not a good thing, folks.
It's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. And even that fourth quarter, they're already down 1 million, still got outscored.
And I would say this, except that there's money on the line, but in a professional game, I don't believe in the mercy rule, but perhaps at some ridiculous threshold like 50 points, the mercy rule goes into effect and you just end the game at that point. Like,
I think if it gets
I would set the bar exceedingly high.
Well, that's happened. It's the second time this year that a game close like this it sort of happened. Toronto got the brakes kicked off them earlier this year too.
Right.
Where you're like, how do you get down 50? Like you have to be handing the ball to the other guy. Like you're just giving it up to him and not like, hey, go take it, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, some more things that are more interesting. Actually, I don't know if it's more interesting than losing by 57 at home. But LeBron's back. Since we've last spoken, and LeBron has come back for his Lakers team. But I think that the thing that's most interesting that I sort of read from him is that he was asked about when he thinks he'll be back to 100%.
Right.
And Joel, I don't know if you saw this quote. He said, it's impossible. I don't think I'll ever get back to 100% in my career. End quote. And that was after talking about that high ankle sprain that he suffered weeks and weeks ago that he's now back from. Joe, we've sort of alluded to this back when the injury happened. He has been Superman forever, but like eventually there's going to be one of these injuries that sort of hobbles a dude, even a guy like LeBron at some point. Do you buy into the fact that LeBron may not ever be 100% what he thinks he could be because of this one injury?
LeBron has always been somebody who emphasizes to everyone who will listen how much he works and how much he goes through. And sometimes that can come off as either a little dramatic or braggadocious, but the amount of work that the man does put in, I mean, as attested by teammates and coaches throughout the years, like I think it's worth mentioning a little bit, no matter how it comes off. So he's been fairly transparent about how he feels about his body, about his career. He's certainly has stated, I want to play till I'm in my mid 40s if I can. And there again, like, what superstar player deep down doesn't want to stay in that limelight as long as they can?
Right.
There's a few exceptions to that, but so he's been very open about those goals. For him to come back now and say, I don't know if I'm ever going to be the player that I was, that is notable. Whether that's a little bit of hyperbole of, hey, everyone, I hope you know what I went through to rehab to get back to this. There could be some of that. But it is out of character for him to make a statement like that now. So whether it's the absolute truth, whether it was sobering to be looking down the barrel of this particular injury, and it's got him kind of thinking from a different perspective now, going, you know what, I am rolling into my late 30s with this much mileage on my legs and my whole body. Maybe it's time for me to admit that, like, I'm not going to be the MVP forever, So it's hard until I guess we see what happens. The concern with me is, as you age, not only, of course, do you recover slower, so these injuries tend to take longer and that sort of thing. And we talked a lot about that, but the potential for compounding injuries just compounds itself, right? I rehabbed from this, and then I tweaked that, and then I came back, and then this other thing set in because I was overcompensating here, and it just compounds and compounds, and eventually that's what gets you. It's the injuries that build upon one another and your body due to age and or mileage that cannot recover from all of those things that are building up. And that's why when we talk about professional athletes and we use the term of breaking down, it literally, in a lot of cases, is breaking down. And it's not just one part of the body, unless, you're talking like a truly catastrophic injury, where it's like Larry Bird and the dude's in traction and you go, yep, it was the back that took him out. Yeah. But for a lot of guys, it's multiple things, right?
Yeah, and LeBron, listen, I don't know if this is the beginning of that for him, but I can only imagine for him to say this. Either one, he's being super dramatic because he does, like you say, he has a flair for that.
That happens at times with him.
Like if he goes through like a playoff stretch where they win and he's the MVP, and all of a sudden, like, man, this guy thought he was going to be on the tail end, right? And all of a sudden, he looks even more like a hero, right? So I sort of understand that side of it. But if he at this age, I'm not surprised that he would be feeling this way after a major injury. He missed like 6 weeks. He's never missed like 6 weeks
right.
outside
of a couple years ago, right?
Yeah, that's outside of a non-major injury. Like the high ankle sprain sort of was one where like that's one that gets normal dudes, right? And he's sort of avoided throughout the majority of his career. And he's had it a couple of times, but like it's been out for like a week or two, just superhuman recovery kind of thing.
Right.
So I am interested to see also how that sort of plays with him coming back, because they still keep losing. They lost to the Kings the other night. They lost to the Wizards. They end their road trip. Like AD's back. LeBron's coming back, and LeBron played a chunk of minutes. He played like 30+ minutes against the Kings. So it's not like they necessarily feathered him back into the lineup. I don't know, man. Like if the Lakers aren't the team I'd bet on in the West right now, like they look a little beaten up. They look a little beaten up, haggard, and they're there to be had as a defending champion.
Yeah, and not only are all of those things true, and if you have a LeBron James who is compromised in any way, you're going to struggle a little bit because he's such a big part of what they're planning to do. But then remember all of the chemistry side of things, and that Davis just got back. Drummond's been there. LeBron hasn't played with Drummond before. I'm not going to write them off because, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, the sheer size of that team is going to be a problem for certain opponents. Like they are just a really big team. Plenty of smart players, plenty of top line talent. So much is going to ride on how healthy are Davis and James by the time the playoffs roll around. Can they avoid those types of, follow-up aftershock injuries that then take you out for 3 games? It's the very thing that like Kevin Durant has been dealing with, right? Major injury, then some nagging injuries after that, and you just can't get back right in time. So much will depend on all that, but the Lakers still can be dangerous, and I don't think we've seen the last of LeBron playing at elite levels. It's just, will it come fewer and further between more and more often as you see a player that truly begins to hit into decline, and you go, yeah, he's absolutely valuable, but maybe he's a guy that now we have to protect a little bit in the lineup in certain ways, and we may not be able to rely on him like clockwork like we used to. That'll be a big deal for the Lakers.
Oh, it'll be huge. It'll be huge. It may be one of the biggest deals for the Lakers because there are 3 or 4 teams that are chomping at the bit right now that are playing really good basketball. And I know, again, a couple of them are a little compromised, but one of them specifically isn't. And
let me say this. The teams that scare me against the Lakers are actually the younger upstart teams like Phoenix.
Me too.
Seeing Phoenix in the early rounds, potentially the Clippers, but they're not healthy all the way. But somebody like Phoenix who's going to play at a fast pace, who's going to have that chip on their shoulder and not be intimidated because they really haven't run up against the Lakers before and are just going to move on a different wavelength, a different pace than what the Lakers are capable of. To me, that's where they're going to be had, even more so than running up against like Denver, as good as Denver's been. And again, the Clippers, it depends on health. Utah has the possibility to just out-execute the Lakers to death if the Lakers aren't sharp. Sure. But I think Phoenix is the one that kind of scares me, where they could get up early in a series and just keep rolling with it, and the Lakers suddenly look old and tired. We'll have to see. But I don't know if a conventional powers matchup with the Lakers is actually as bad on paper as facing one of these younger teams that just wants to go.
Let me move forward to another guy who just returned to the court. LaMelo Ball came back last night for Charlotte, and he's the toast of the internet. Did you see his underhand full court pass?
Yeah, that was something else. I don't know if I've seen somebody. I recall the Jason Kidd bowling down the middle of the lane kind of bounce pass, and Darren Williams, when he was with the Jazz, used to throw a mean full court bounce pass. But I don't know that I've ever seen the half court like softball throw, and really it was almost full court, 3/4 court softball type of throw on a lob like that. That's why you watch the game, because every once in a while somebody comes around and does something where you go, you know what, I have never seen that before in watching the game for 20-25 years at this point.
Yeah, so he's been gone for a while. Is he still your favorite to win the Rookie of the Year?
Now that he's back, if he gives everybody that little bit of, hey, don't forget about me, remember what I was doing before.
That's kind of what I think this
I think he's the shoe-in. Yeah, I think he's the shoe-in. And
because he could have sat out the rest of the year and just sort of healed and been fine. Like,
right.
He didn't need all of these extra games, even though Charlotte still can get into the playoffs at this point, which is also partly what this is too, that they still want to try to, make it postseason wise, which,
but I think Anthony Edwards has had a phenomenal rookie season, but playing in Minnesota doesn't help. And he did have about 6 to 8 weeks early on. He started out really nicely, looked like the light bulb was on, and then all of a sudden the scouting report caught up to Edwards and the light bulb went off. And it went off hard for about 6 to 8 weeks. And he very much looked like a rookie who was overmatched. And a few people even started using the bust label prematurely. And then I think with film sessions and being in practice and just kind of getting his sea legs under him, the light bulb went back on. And Anthony Edwards has given us plenty of like all-time highlight posterization dunks here this season already. He looks like a guy who conceivably, maybe once or twice in his career down the line, could lead the league in scoring. Like, that's not hyperbolic, and that's not the Timberwolves fan in me talking. He is that good offensively this young at getting baskets. But all that said, LaMelo Ball has been better in more ways for longer, has been flashier about it, and Charlotte has been a playoff team, whereas the Timberwolves haven't. And to me, it's a no-brainer at this point. As much as I love Anthony Edwards, it's a no-brainer that Ball gets it, provided that he stays healthy these next 10 games here. Nobody else comes close. There are some Kings fans out there, and I love Mark Jones, who left ESPN to go call Kings games. I love him to death as a broadcaster, but him and Doug Christie have been trying to pimp Tyrese Halliburton so hard for Rookie of the Year. It's comical. Like, yeah, Halliburton has been the steal of the draft. There's no doubt about it. That is a heady player. But it's just the fact that he turned out to be like really respectable and heady that they're celebrating. Like, that's not Rookie of the Year quality in this year when you've got both Edwards and Ball to choose from. Like, I'm sorry, Halliburton fans. I look at Tyrese Halliburton and I see the rich man's George Hill from early career George Hill. I don't see a guy who, could lead the league in scoring, or a guy who's going to be all over the highlight reels and contribute to wins in the way that LaMelo Ball is. They're not the same.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest with you, with a lot of these awards, I wouldn't say a lot, a handful of these top awards that the NBA sort of doles out every season, especially when they're voted on, this is another one that I think you need things that catch your eye, right? And what catches your eye is big time dunks, lots of scoring, highlight plays. And I think LaMelo Ball has given you a fair share of that. And Anthony Edwards too. I think when it comes down to it, and I think he's the betting favorite right now, is LaMelo Ball to be but not by a ton, right? I think Anthony Edwards is like plus 200 and LaMelo's like minus 300 or something. So it's in, and that may have gone a little bit up since his underneath pass or under or softball pass the other night. That I think that you sort of go based on what you've seen, if that makes sense.
I do. For Rookie of the Year, I think that means a lot. As much as, and sometimes the statistics are so like unequivocal that you go, he may not be flashy, but he's head and shoulders producing better than everybody else.
Right.
But Ball's got plenty of that going on.
Yeah, unless someone is scoring like 17 and everyone else is scoring 4. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where you're either much headier in the stats department, or we've seen a ton of highlights from you.
Right.
And plus, he's going to be on the team that probably gets into the playoffs. And
exactly.
So we're going to see him play postseason basketball most likely. And, for a team that was not expected to be playing in the postseason this year, it's kind of a big deal. And it's hard to look past LaMelo Ball and say that he's not a big reason for that.
Absolutely. And he accepted a bench role early on. James Borrego found ways to integrate him into 3 and even 4 guard lineups to be able to keep Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier engaged and active. Malik Monk has been in that rotation a little bit too. And then Ball won the starting job outright. And before the injury was a huge reason that the Charlotte Hornets are like, they're looking like the plucky upstart in the East that the Phoenix Suns are looking like in the West. Now, granted, Phoenix has gotten more wins and the Chris Paul factor is there. You get the sense that Phoenix is like a year ahead on schedule based on what, but you squint and you see what Charlotte's doing and you go, I don't think they're necessarily that far away from really getting in and being a legit threat to a lot of teams. And that does come down to, with no disrespect to the other good players who are there, PJ Washington's had a nice year. Miles Bridges has just been hammering home some huge dunks and is a really nice two-way player for them. But so much of this goes back to Ball. When you look at a Hornets team that with and without Ball has been middle of the pack offensively, they're above average defensively, but they're middle of the pack in assists, middle of the pack in rebounds. And then you look at what Ball is doing as their second leading scorer, their leading assist guy. He's in the mix for like top 3 in rebounds just because they don't have anybody that gets more than like 6.5 per game. He's their leading steal guy as well. So his fingerprints are all over this team, despite only starting 22 of 42 games up to this point that he's appeared in. And it's really easy to look and go, he is the engine. Yeah, he's a flawed player still. He's got a long ways to develop, but he's way better than people thought he was going to be as far as making an impact on the game. Not just highlights, but making a positive impact on the game, making big plays, being heady on both sides of the ball. The shooting will come. I think he will continue to improve as a defender, and that was the huge concern about Ball. Right, coming out of Australia last year where he played, was dude can't defend anybody. And yeah, his shooting is shaky, but he'll make some big shots, but he can't defend. And he has at least competed. 1.6 steals isn't anything to sniff at. And I think the upside there is phenomenally high for him, as well as Anthony Edwards. I think they're going to be linked for a long time. And Edwards will get the proverbial chip on his shoulder from the quote unquote snub this year as Ball gets it, but rightly so.
Joel, last time we spoke, only 2 NBA teams had clinched a playoff spot, one in the East and one in the West, Brooklyn and Utah. And since then, including 2 that night, I think, we're up to 5 teams who have clinched a playoff spot. Brooklyn, Philly, and Milwaukee in the East, and Utah and Phoenix in the West. And I bring that up because we've talked so much about those teams in the top at times that we pay attention to the bottom of the possible play-in scenario. And one of those teams that's battling for that is a team that's warmed up recently. The Pelicans have won 3 out of 4, and I'm sorry to bring up a team that just beat your Timberwolves.
They did. I got to watch that game. Zion
was nuts.
Oh my goodness. And I got to look back at the actual box score line, but the dude did not make or even take, I think, a single 2-pointer or 3-pointer from like outside of 5 feet. Like he literally went and doubled and had 30 plus points on layups the entire game, like layups and dunks and just getting to the basket. It just phenomenal game from me. He fouled out 3 Timberwolves players on the front line.
That's pretty awesome. Like you don't get to see that a lot anymore, right? Like you don't get to see like these.
No,
big
that's Shaq
physical
levels, right? That's
like,
Shaq level.
You don't see these even when there are sometimes mismatches, right? You don't see multiple dudes fouling out while they're trying to defend the same guy underneath much anymore. And even though there still are big, strong guys in the NBA, they're not quite built like Zion is, which is why I think so many people look forward to what Zion can be in the league.
And it's not like he fouled out, players who don't have some heft to them, like Karl Anthony Towns fouled out, Naz Reid fouled out, who's a big dude as well, and then Jalen McDaniels fouled out, and he's a little bit more wiry as a rookie. But yeah, Zion Williamson, 37 points, and 9 boards, 8 assists. He was 14 of 17 from the field, and 9 of 15 from the free throw line. So he could have been well over 40 points if he had made a couple of free throws there. But yeah, that's literally all layups and dunks. Sorry to interrupt, but I finally saw the box score.
Yeah, and I'm looking at his shot chart now. In fact, I could probably share this with you just so you can see it, just to see how bizarre this is. And you can sort of see this on the video feed of this. But there's his shot chart there on the left, right? And it's insane. It's all it's all within the charge line. Like that's nuts.
He's leading the league in points in the paint by a mile. Like it's not even close. And the percentage of points in the paint, we're going to have to wait for some of the chips to fall. But yeah, it's going to be pretty historic.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not a guy that scored 12 points, right? Like, and just got a couple baskets.
Yeah, it's not DeAndre Jordan, Tyson Chandler type of stuff here.
Right. So, I want to get back to the Pelicans themselves. So they're 3 games out of the 10th spot, right? So San Antonio is currently right near at spot number 10, but there is some time still to play. They've won 3 out of 4, like I just mentioned. Do you think this Pelicans team has enough pluck to be able to squeeze again in to a less NBA obviously trying to get Zion in to the playoff scenario?
I don't think so this time around, because as many games as we've seen where Zion is, transcendent, or Brandon Ingram plays really, really well, and there's been lots of that. New Orleans has had a lot of injuries. They're extremely young, and they've just been so inconsistent when it comes to getting stops. They'll have power outages on offense as well at times where things just get really ugly and break down. I think it's too little too late. They'll make a run here. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The league would love to see New Orleans in the playoffs again, or at least in the play-in. I do think like this will be the year that really solidifies what Stan Van Gundy has been trying to preach to them in a very loud, nasally Stan Van Gundy voice about just how much every game is important and how all those little details matter. And as Ingram and Zion continue to go through their maturation process, Lonzo Ball as well, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the foundation there is really good. But last year it was such a slow start. Then Zion came and it was a hot start, and it was still almost too little too late, except the league kind of gifted them an avenue to get in. This year it's just been starts and stops. Like, you win a game here, you drop 2 there. You win 2, you lose 3. And it's been like that all year. I don't see that changing necessarily unless, and maybe you've got their schedule up in front of you, unless there's a lot of teams just kind of falling down in front of them and the schedule gods smile down upon them. But they're 4-6 in their last 10. So I know they've won a couple, but this is par for the course all year. And the teams that are ahead of them, with the exception of Golden State, who without Kelly Oubre, and they've been really inconsistent as well, but they've still got Steph Curry, who's been balling at an insane level. I don't see any of the teams ahead of them, be it Portland, Memphis, or San Antonio. I don't see any of those 3 falling out of the play-in tournament at this point, and Golden State is kind of a long shot as far as I'm concerned. So New Orleans, this is going to be a tough lesson that they got to learn, and hopefully next year they're that much better for it and are, hopefully next year they're a top 6 team, honestly.
Well, let me run down their schedule for you, okay? Because there's what, 2, 4, 6, 8 games left for them.
Yeah, not many.
They play tomorrow, Monday, and Tuesday back-to-back at home against Golden State, both games. Very important games if you're trying to get in, obviously.
Critical. Yeah, wow, that's critical.
Yeah, and then afterwards, they go to Philadelphia. It would be interesting to see where they are by Friday. Philadelphia is. I'm sure they'll still be within the shot for the number 1 seed, so they'll think that'll probably still be a fully efforted game. Then they go to Charlotte, who again also battling for their playoff lives as well. Then they go to Memphis. They go to Dallas, then at Golden State, and then they host the Lakers at the end of the season.
So they've got Golden State 3 times in the next 8 games. Is that right?
That's right. 3 in the last 8, 2 at home this week, and 1 in the last week of the season.
So I rest my case even more. Like, there are no lay-down games in front of them. All of those teams have a reason to keep playing. New Orleans has a shot in most of those, again, because of Zion and Ingram. But, yeah, it will come down to Golden State or New Orleans for, in this case, the scheduling thing. Like, that's going to determine who gets in.
All right, Joel, I want to wrap this thing up, if you don't mind, with one philosophical discussion I want to have with you. And the through line, I don't know if you paid attention to this podcast so far, Joel, has been your Minnesota Timberwolves. So Thursday night, your Timberwolves were awesome, right? When they beat Golden State. Very good team effort from Golden State, and more importantly, from Minnesota. But what Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, noticed about that game is that not only did they lose that matchup by double digits, but they got out-rebounded 57-34 in that game. So what I'm going to ask you, Mr. Joel Cordes, is something that Mr. Steve Kerr brought up in that game, in post-game. He talked about the modern NBA, and he said when this box score was brought to him, this signals to me a modern NBA team. This is the modern league. Guys don't box out. It's just the way it is. Every night on League Pass, he says, I see the same thing. Players let guys come in from the weak side, and they think, I'll just get the rebound. It's a disease that's rampant in the NBA. The problem is, if you're a real small team like us, then it's going to hurt you more than it will hurt the other teams. He also went on to say that most guys don't have coaches in high school and college yelling at them for 8 straight years and sort of telling them to do the 2 words we hear screamed, at least I remember in my head over and over again from the sideline, box out. So what do you think of Steve Kerr's comments about guys not boxing out in the league so much?
All right. So yeah, it's an interesting comment. I will say that it's a common coach's lament at various times when they are frustrated. I can think back to watching games in the 90s and growing up, and coaches then lamenting about how this or that fundamental, whatever was pissing them off at the moment, was missing. And you can go back to like the 70s, and there's newspaper articles about this or that fundamental is missing. And certainly, like, it does go missing at times, and certain players are better at certain fundamentals than others. And I think when you are a professional, you're under such a big microscope that when you don't do those little things, it's going to stand out. So on the one hand, I take what Kerr says as a grain of salt. Like, yeah, I've heard this song and dance before, and you're mad because your team didn't box out. Fair enough. On the other hand, he's got a point, because I noticed the same thing. And as a coach who has coached at the high school level, has coached middle schoolers, I am one of those coaches who's yelling, box out, box out. That's a huge emphasis, and it doesn't come naturally to a lot of kids. And we have a term for that on our teams. When you just stand under the basket trying to out-tall somebody, we call that kitty cat rebounding, because you're like a bunch of little kitties all pawing at a ball of string, hoping that you might get it. And 9 times out of 10, tall player wins, or jumping player wins. And rather than jump, you teach your kids to dig in, get underneath somebody, clear some space, and you jump after the space has been cleared. And a lot of times jumping isn't even necessary if you have cleared that space. But yes, it's something that needs to be taught more. I see that in low level leagues. Like I've coached and I've watched plenty of college ball and been around the NBA for a long time, including covering it professionally. So I know where he's coming from. The flip side of that is Steve Kerr, if you feel that your team and your players are not trained properly for that, it is your job to teach them to do that.
Well,
So
do you see that this seems to be like a league wide issue when you're watching games? I'll be honest, I don't pay a lot of attention to the blocking out, so he probably pays attention to that a lot more than I do. So I don't know. I asked from someone who watches with more trained eyes like you.
It comes and goes between a lot of players of when they do it or when they lose focus or they don't think somebody's around. A lot of players don't have to do it as much anymore because teams don't crash the offensive boards like they used to. They're trained to get back. You only send one guy to crash the offensive boards these days because teams are so quick going back the other direction that everybody otherwise has to fall back on defense. So that is part of it. There are certain guys who do it every time. A shout out to Taj Gibson, for example. That dude will body check you and check up every single time and is very fundamentally sound. And there's plenty of others like him who have made a very nice career in the NBA by doing those fundamentals and not only creating rebounds for themselves, but just that team rebounding aspect of creating that box out for somebody else. There are some guys who just don't do it at all, and that's probably who Steve Kerr is upset at, but he's probably more upset at the guys who know better and they do it sometimes, they just don't do it all the time. And that comes from the again, lack of focus at times. But one of the other things that I've learned in covering the game and being at games in person versus what you see on TV, the game is so fast in person. And there are so many little things that are going on, so many little fundamentals, little nuances that you just don't see on TV from a zoomed out angle, that sometimes it appears like someone didn't do something or they didn't play with a motor or whatever it is. And you have a totally different perspective of when you're seeing that in person. But there again, Steve Kerr is in person. So he's speaking from that angle on it too. And again, I go back to Steve, if you're unhappy with your team doing it, you can sit there and carp about how other, AAU coaches and whatnot have to teach it. But don't go down that road too far because otherwise it just sounds like you carping like, why do I have to teach it when somebody else should have done that already? Fair enough, but it's your job. And you, Steve Kerr, have kind of touted yourself as this. It's your job to be a teacher at all times. Like that's a coach's number one job, really, is you are a teacher. And then you're also a personnel manager and play calling and all that stuff comes last. So Steve Kerr, if you don't want to teach boxing out, then get somebody on your staff to be doing that more often. And if your guys are not following your lead and your voice after 8 years or whatever, like that's for you to work out with your general manager about whether those guys are a fit for your team or not, because they won't follow basic directions when they're a professional. But I don't like the doubling down too much on it's endemic. It's everywhere. I would say there's a whole lot of nuance and layers to an assertion like that being true.
Somewhat. Okay, so I just want people to know that it's basketball by association that has the analyst on it that told Steve Kerr to look in the mirror when it comes to his comments. Also, basketball by association features someone who I think very intelligently also just said, Steve Kerr, you know where to stick it. So, because it's true. It's one of those things that you see on the internet all the time. Like, man, does nobody ever remember this? And you're like, of course people remember this. What are you talking about?
Right.
Like, you get a half a dozen or a couple of thousand retweets or something oh man, okay, so some of you didn't remember it. Okay. But it happened. Everybody else remembers it.
And it's the age-old thing too, where there's a certain segment of folks out there who maybe just love college basketball, and I don't begrudge them that at all, or have a beef to grind with the NBA for their own personal reasons of why they don't like it. And so sometimes you'll hear a certain segment of folks who are like, I don't watch the NBA, I watch college basketball because of the fundamentals, and they play fundamentals in college basketball. And it's like, really? Like, if you go back and look, certainly there are some fundamentals that certain coaches and certain teams do really well, and I hats off to them, fantastic. But there's a lot of fundamentals lacking in the college game, including the ability to run an offense that has more than one thing going on in it at once.
Oh my God.
Like that's a college basketball hallmark. So for those who love to, do that ivory tower routine, it crumbles really quickly when you're like, I don't think the college basketball game is really as good of basketball if you're going to be on the purest level as you think it is. And again, there's a whole lot of like layers, sometimes very subjective layers of why people go that route. But I like Steve Kerr as a coach, and I like when Steve Kerr is a teacher and a communicator. I don't like when Steve Kerr becomes grumpy old Steve Kerr. And this was one of those cases because it's not a good light for him. And a lot of times it does ring hollow, as in, okay, Steve was real frustrated about this in the moment and decided to get on his soapbox and preach about it when, dude, just go do your job and get your team to box out, right? That's your job too.
Well, I mean, someone won the rebounding battle that night, right?
Somebody did box out, apparently, or at least out jump. But I mean, it is absolutely true. If you're a small team and you don't know how to box out, you will die. There's no way around it. Like, you will die because somebody is always bigger and taller than you. So you better win on the fundamentals. And insofar as that was what Steve Kerr was getting at, I agree with that.
Yeah, but that's a very small sliver of what he says.
Right.
Or maybe even intimate. You may not even specifically said that part, but
right. It's kind of like the college professors who get real mad at kids coming up, out of the high schools and elementary school, and college professors love to carp about, I can't believe they don't have this writing skill or this sort of thing. What are they teaching these kids in these schools anymore? And you go, all right, dude, that's a reasonable complaint, but to just go, somebody else should have taught them this, and I'm going to forget that my job literally is to be a teacher. It just comes off as arrogant because you can step in and do some of that teaching too, my friend. It's a team effort to get somebody into the fundamentals of whatever it is, whether it's academia or sports or music or whatever. You're never too big to just go, give me the finished product. That's all I want.
Right. Sorry. Steve Kerr, James Wiseman, who's not even really playing right now. Not a finished product right now. Not you have only a handful, less than a handful of those on that team. You still have to coach and to teach.
Most of his team is young, right? Most of the Warriors are young, and a lot of those guys are just barely out of the G League, honestly. Juan Toscano Anderson is a guy nobody's heard of up to this point, and yet is playing major minutes. Mark Mulder, Damian Lee played some minutes for them last year, but a lot of those guys played on last year's team that was tanktastic and now are suddenly in a little bit of a bigger role. And if you're mad that Draymond Green didn't box out and you should know better, okay, call out Draymond Green. But a lot of these other guys, they're young enough that those are developmental prospects, and some teaching necessary, right? Add water.
Exactly. You know what? My team's not boxing out, and no one else is either, apparently. This league is just terrible. Yes, maybe we should, I don't know, hold a seminar in the summer or something about that.
Steve, you're welcome to resign your post as Golden State Warriors coach and go, start an AAU team and start teaching the youths all about.
Oh my God. How good could the Warriors be if Klay Thompson comes back and they started boxing out? Oh my God. Yeah. Or just shut up about it and just go do it. And then all of a sudden you turn out to be a pretty good team again. Mm-hmm. So, but that's the hard part. All right, Joel, that's going to do it for us. Another BbA in the books, the Wilt Chamberlain episode. Thank you, Joel, for being part of the experience. Here is my 100 right there.
and I do like that we had two different philosophical questions to bookend this episode. We talked about the philosophy of holding up a piece of paper with points on it. And the very, very esoteric level of philosophy about why it was Will that was pissing you off about all this, when really it's Jayson Tatum. I think there's some Freudian level subliminal stuff going on here if you're mad at Wilt. And then to end on the world is falling apart because they don't know how to rebound. I appreciate that. And again, everybody, if you've been listening on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, Spreaker, and you want the video version, if you want to have seen Arky Shea hold up a piece of paper that, I don't know, had a social security number or something on it, then come on over to YouTube and watch the video version, and vice versa if you ever need audio only. We will do this again Wednesday.
Yeah, buddy, with our BbA bite, Joel, say goodbye to the good people.
Goodbye, good people.